You must understand that when two awakened souls finally meet, the world around them does not remain the same. It cannot, for something ancient stirs, something older than memory, older than the personal narratives that shape your individual psychology. What awakens in that moment is the primordial recognition of shared inner substance, the echo of a pattern that lived long before you learned your first words. When two individuals have walked through their own darkness, descended into the unconscious, faced their own shadow, without turning away, the meeting is not merely interpersonal, it is archetypal. It is as if two flames that had burned alone in the vast night suddenly see each other and realize they were never meant to burn in isolation. Most people do not meet each other at the level of the soul. They meet at the level of personas, at the level of masks constructed to protect the fragile ego. They meet from fear, from conditioning, from the patterns that have been repeated across generations. But two awakened souls cannot meet from the persona, for they have already dismantled it. They meet from something deeper, from the silent realm where the self breathes. To recognize another awakened soul is to recognize yourself reflected in a mirror that does not distort. And that is why the connection changes everything, because suddenly you are no longer able to pretend to be smaller than you are. You see, the unconscious has its own intelligence. It arranges encounters long before the ego becomes aware of them. There is an invisible magnetism that draws two awakened beings toward each other. This magnetism is not sentimental. It is purposeful. It arises from the needs of the psyche, from the necessity of balancing opposites, from the demand that each soul continues its process of individuation. Sometimes this meeting occurs at the precise moment when both individuals have reached a psychological threshold, when they have outgrown their old skin, but have not yet stepped fully into the new one. And so the presence of the other becomes catalytic. It pushes the transformation forward. Imagine a dream in which you walk through a dark forest, uncertain of the path, uncertain of what lies ahead. You hear the movement of branches behind you and instinctively think it is danger. But when you turn, if you see another traveler, one who has been walking through their own forest, through their own labyrinth, the presence of this figure does not relieve the darkness. Instead, it reveals that the darkness is shared, that the path is mutually navigated. I have always said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When two awakened souls meet, they are not meeting in the light, they are meeting in the same darkness, but with eyes that can now see. This is why the connection feels ancient. It is not that you have met before as personalities, it is that you are meeting within the realm of the self, which is timeless. The unconscious does not respect linear chronology. It does not care about the dates and details the ego clings to. When recognition occurs, it feels like remembering something from a dream you forgot you were dreaming, or hearing a melody whose notes you somehow already knew. You feel that this person is a continuation of a story your soul has been telling long before your birth. In the analytic room, I have witnessed this phenomenon in many forms. Patients spoke of meeting someone who seemed to activate deep patterns within them. Sometimes the meeting triggered fear because the soul senses that this connection will unravel everything false. Sometimes it triggered longing because the psyche longs to be seen, and sometimes, most intriguingly, it triggered a kind of inner silence, as if the entire psyche bowed in recognition that silence is the mark of truth. The soul does not shout when it recognizes another soul. It becomes still. You may ask, why does this meeting occur only after awakening? Because before awakening, individuals see only projections. They do not see each other. They see their unmet needs, their wounds, their fantasies reflected onto another person. And the tragedy is that they believe this reflection to be reality only when one has withdrawn their projections, reclaimed the shadow, and confronted the inner world with honest eyes, can they encounter another human being as they truly are. Two awakened souls recognize each other not because they complete each other, but because they no longer need completion. They are whole enough to see clearly. When two awakened souls encounter one another, both light and shadow are activated. There is no romanticism here. Do not imagine that the meeting is simply peaceful or soft. It is often unsettling because the psyche begins to move rapidly. Old patterns break apart, archetypes awaken within the unconscious, dormant forces stir and rise to the surface. It is like encountering a dream figure who has the strange power to rearrange the symbolic landscape of your inner world. You feel as if this person is reading a story you have not yet fully written. You sense that they know what you are capable of becoming, even if you yourself are still hesitant. I once encountered a dream from a patient in which he described meeting a woman with eyes like mirrors. In the dream, she said nothing. She simply looked at him. And in her gaze, he saw his own unlived potential, his fears, his destiny unfolding like a scroll. He woke trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. When he met a woman in waking life, whose presence evoked the same inner trembling, he understood that the psyche had prepared him for this encounter long before it occurred. This is how the unconscious works. It foreshadows, it creates symbolic rehearsals, and when two awakened souls meet, it is often after a long preparation within the depths of the psyche. A true soul connection is not built on similarity, it is built on resonance. Resonance occurs when two psyches vibrate at the frequency of authenticity, when both have confronted enough inner material to communicate without masks. You can feel this resonance before a word is spoken. Sometimes it comes as an inexplicable calm, sometimes as an equally inexplicable disturbance, sometimes as the sensation that your inner world is being rearranged, and sometimes, most mysteriously, it comes as the sense that time has paused, that everything you thought mattered suddenly falls away. It is as if the unconscious has opened a door, and for a moment you are allowed to glimpse the architecture of destiny. Yet beware The ego often tries to claim this connection as its own possession. The ego wants to label it, control it, force it into familiar categories, but an awakened soul connection cannot be contained. It is the psyche's movement toward wholeness, not the ego's desire for certainty. The moment the ego tries to control it, the connection becomes distorted. You must learn to hold this kind of bond with reverence, not ownership. I should tell you something. Essential awakened souls do not meet by luck. They meet because their inner worlds have reached a similar stage of development. They meet because both have passed through fire. They meet because both carry keys to the other's locked doors. And so the meeting becomes not a romance, but an alchemical reaction. Two psyches enter the same container, and transformation begins. This is why the connection changes everything, not because the other person saves you, but because their presence catalyzes the part of you that is ready to emerge. It is often said that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, but in the case of awakened souls, when the self is ready, the counterpart appears. This counterpart is not a savior. They are a mirror, a challenger, a companion on the journey through the unconscious. Their presence can activate deep healing, but only because both souls are willing to descend into truth together. And perhaps most profoundly, when two awakened souls meet, the relationship becomes a vessel in which both can reveal their shadows without fear of rejection. This is rare. Most relationships break under the weight of the shadow, but awakened souls are not afraid of darkness, because they have already walked through their own. When shadow meets shadow, there is no collapse. There is recognition. There is compassion. There is the understanding that darkness is not the enemy, but the birthplace of light. If you ever encounter such a connection, do not rush it. Do not cling to it. Let it unfold with the rhythm of the psyche, which is slower, deeper, and wiser than you imagine. For when two awakened souls recognize each other, they do not meet merely for themselves. They meet for the evolution of their inner worlds. And so, my friends, let us continue descending into the hidden architecture of such a meeting that does not occur in the daylight of ordinary consciousness, but in the twilight realm where symbols breathe and the unconscious speaks in a language older than words. When two awakened souls finally recognize each other, what unfolds is not simply a relationship. It is a psychological event. It is movement within the collective unconscious. It is the self calling both individuals toward a deeper union with their own wholeness. In this sense, the other soul is not merely a companion, but a living symbol, a manifestation of the archetype that your psyche needs at this stage of individuation. This is why such connections are often surrounded by synchronicities. These synchronicities are not coincidences. They are expressions of the causal order that underlies our visible reality. The more awakened you are, the more sensitive you become to these subtle patterns. You begin to notice that events align in ways that feel orchestrated, as if life itself were guiding the two of you toward a shared psychological task. When you meet such a person, it is not unusual to feel as though the universe has conspired in your favor. You might find that your dreams shift, that old memories resurface, that unresolved wounds rise to consciousness. These are signs that the psyche is preparing you for transformation. I recall a case of a woman who had endured many years of psychological turmoil. She struggled with abandonment, with a mother complex, with the fear of intimacy that arises when one has been wounded by those expected to provide safety. After years of inner work, she met a man whose presence awakened something in her she could not name. She felt a strange familiarity, as though she had known him beyond the boundaries of time. Yet, what moved her most deeply was not comfort, but confrontation. His presence stirred her shadow. It forced her to examine the parts of herself she had kept buried. At first, she resisted, but what she eventually discovered was that his presence acted as a mirror for her own unlived potential. This is how the unconscious works. It draws to you the person who carries the very qualities you have rejected or disowned. In psychological terms, this is projection, but in its awakened form, projection becomes revelation. You no longer remain blind to the qualities you see in the other. Instead, you recognize them as part of yourself, waiting to be integrated. When two awakened souls meet, their projections do not lead to blindness, they lead to awareness. The projection becomes a bridge back to oneself. We cannot speak of soul connections without speaking of dreams, for dreams are the language of the soul. When two awakened individuals are meant to encounter each other, there are often dreams beforehand, dreams of reunion, dreams of a mysterious figure who appears with a sense of authority or familiarity. These dreams are not fantasies. They are messages from the unconscious preparing the psyche for recognition. The dreams may be symbolic, filled with archetypes such as the wise old man, the anima, the animus, or the child. They may contain images of journeys, mountains, rivers, doors, or animals that act as guides. In these symbolic landscapes, the psyche rehearses what the ego will later experience. One patient described a dream in which he stood before a locked gate. A man approached, carrying a lantern, without speaking. He placed the lantern at her feet and walked away. She later met someone in her waking life whose presence illuminated her inner world in a way she had never experienced. She told me, it felt as though he placed a light inside me that allowed me to finally see myself. I told her the truth. No one can place light inside you, but another soul can activate the inner flame that already exists but has been hidden in the darkness. This is the power of soul recognition. It does not create something new. It reveals what was always there. When two awakened souls recognize each other, they become catalysts for one another's individuation process. Individuation is not the pursuit of happiness, nor is it the pursuit of a perfect relationship. It is the pursuit of wholeness, and wholeness requires the integration of opposites, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious. the other person becomes a vessel through which these opposites can be seen, confronted, and eventually united. This is why such connections contain both beauty and difficulty. They expose the unfinished work of the psyche. You may feel profound peace in their presence one moment and deep discomfort the next. You may feel drawn toward them with an intensity that defies logic and simultaneously feel the urge to run. This is not ambivalence. It is the psyche's response to the activation of archetypal forces. You sense that this connection holds the power to transform you, and transformation is always frightening to the ego. But fear, in this context, is not a warning, it is an invitation. There is something else that occurs. When two awakened souls recognize each other, the collapse of psychological distance. Normally, people maintain a distance between their inner and outer worlds. They reveal their surface selves, keeping their depths hidden. But awakened souls have walked through these depths already. They have confronted their shame, their fears, their wounds, and their unlived potential. Because of this, when they meet, the usual barriers dissolve, the connection becomes transparent. It is as if you can see into the other's inner world, not because they reveal everything, but because your soul already understands. This transparency can be frightening for those who have not yet accepted their own inner truth. Some flee from it, others cling to it. Both are reactions of the ego. The awakened response is to remain still, to observe the emotions that arise, and to recognize that the connection is not asking for possession, but for presence. The other soul is not here to rescue you or to complete you. They are here to stand with you as you face the depths of your own unconscious. In these encounters, one often experiences a sense of inevitability. It is not fate in the romantic sense, but fate in the psychological sense, the unfolding of inner necessity. You realize that every wound, every relationship, every heartbreak, every period of solitude has prepared you for this connection. You realize that your suffering has not been meaningless. It has carved a space within you that now allows you to recognize the other soul. Without your struggles, you would have walked past them without noticing. Awakening heightens perception. Sometimes such a connection arrives at a time of crisis. When the psyche is undergoing dissolution, the breaking down of old structures, it often summons a counterpart. This counterpart may not stay forever. Their role may be temporary, but their impact is eternal. They appear as a guide through the liminal space between who you have been and who you are becoming. They help you cross the threshold. They help you see the path that was hidden, and once the transition is complete, the connection may evolve into something new or may dissolve back into the unconscious. I must emphasize this. The purpose of a soul connection is not attachment, it is evolution. If you attempt to cling to the other out of fear of loss, you betray the very purpose of the encounter. You must allow the connection to be fluid, to move in accordance with the psyche's needs. Sometimes the deepest love is the willingness to allow the other to follow their own inner path. Even if that path leads away from you, The soul knows no imprisonment. Yet, when two awakened souls truly resonate, the connection tends to endure, not always in the form of a relationship, but in the form of an inner bond. You may separate physically, but psychologically, energetically, symbolically, the connection remains. This is not obsession. It is the nature of archetypal bonds. They transcend physical proximity. I once told a patient that when you meet someone who activates your individuation, they become part of your inner world, regardless of what occurs externally. She asked how long such a bond lasts. I told her the truth as long as it needs to. These connections dissolve only when the psyche has integrated the necessary material. Until then, they continue to influence dreams, thoughts, emotions, and symbolic processes. The other person becomes an inner figure, a guide, a challenger, a muse. This is not fantasy, it is psychology. The unconscious uses outer figures to awaken inner ones. If you have ever met someone who felt like both a beginning and an ending, you have experienced this. If you have ever felt seen in a way that stripped you of pretense, you have experienced this. If you have ever sensed that someone entered your life not by accident, but by design, you have experienced this. And if the meeting changed you, if it altered the trajectory of your soul, then you understand the gravity of what I am describing. When two awakened souls recognize each other, time becomes irrelevant. The connection may deepen slowly or unfold instantly, but in either case, it carries the imprint of inevitability. You feel as though you are stepping into a story that was written long before you were conscious of it. You feel guided, you feel summoned, and sometimes you feel undone, not in a destructive way, but in a way that reveals new layers of your psyche. This recognition is not a gift, it is a responsibility. For once, you have seen another soul in their truth. You cannot return to the superficiality of ordinary relationships. You cannot pretend that masks satisfy you. You cannot hide from your own depth. And this is why such meetings change everything, because they awaken you to the reality that the soul is not an abstraction, but a living force shaping your life from within. As we go deeper, you must understand that such a connection does not merely unite two individuals, it awakens two destinies. When two awakened souls recognize each other, the encounter serves as a threshold before the meeting. Each individual carries their own symbolic storyline, the wounds inherited from childhood, the complexes formed from early interactions, the archetypal narratives, shaping their perception, the dreams, guiding them like distant lanterns. But once the recognition occurs, these storylines begin to intertwine, not merge, for souls never lose their individuality, but intertwine like two rivers that remain separate, yet share the same current. There's a moment, often subtle, in which you realize the connection is not happening to you, but is happening through you. The psyche becomes the stage. The encounter becomes the drama, and you become both witness and participant. This is why awakened soul connections can feel overwhelming. You sense that you are not merely interacting with another human being. You are participating in a symbolic event orchestrated by the deeper layers of the unconscious. I recall a man who dreamed of standing at the edge of a vast desert. He had spent years wandering alone in the barren psychological landscape of his unresolved childhood. In the dream, a woman approached him, carrying a vessel of water. She offered it without speaking. When he drank, the desert began to bloom. Later, he met a woman whose presence awakened a vitality within him that had long been dormant. He felt revived, as though life were returning to the barren regions of his psyche. But the truth, which he eventually understood, was that she had not brought water from outside. She had activated the wellspring within him. The dream had already revealed what the waking meeting would make real, that the soul recognizes what it is ready to receive. This is what happens when two awakened souls meet. You begin to drink from the inner wellspring that had been hidden beneath layers of fear, shame, or unconscious defenses. The other person does not fill your emptiness. They illuminate it so that you may fill it yourself. They do not heal your wounds. They awaken the healer within you. This is why awakened connections never arise out of dependency. They arise out of readiness. But let us not romanticize this process. The recognition of another awakened soul often arrives with conflict. Not external conflict necessarily, but internal conflict, the stirring of psychological winds that shake the branches of long-forgotten memories and unresolved shadows. When the soul awakens, the shadow awakens as well. You begin to see aspects of yourself reflected in the other that you had hoped to ignore: your fears of intimacy, your patterns of avoidance, your inherited complexes, your unhealed wounds. The other soul becomes a mirror that reveals not only your potential, but also your unfinished work. This is why, for some, the encounter triggers panic. They sense the magnitude of the transformation it demands. They sense that the ego's familiar patterns will not survive. They sense that this connection requires truth, and truth is something many people fear even more than pain. But the awakened soul does not turn away. It may hesitate, it may tremble, it may wrestle with the shadow, but ultimately it remains, for it recognizes that the other is not the source of the disturbance, but the catalyst for the unveiling. In this sense, the awakened soul connection is a kind of psychological alchemy. The other person functions as the alchemical fire, heating the vessel of the psyche so that the impurities rise to the surface. These impurities are not moral flaws, but unconscious elements waiting for integration, the abandoned child, the wounded lover, the rejected self, the buried anger, the unlived passion. When these elements rise to the surface, the ego often feels overwhelmed, but the soul rejoices, for it knows that only through revelation can liberation occur. This is why awakened soul connections carry such intensity. They bring the unconscious to the surface with remarkable speed. It is not unusual for two awakened individuals to feel as though they have known each other for years. The psyche does not measure time the way the ego does. The psyche measures resonance, and resonance collapses time. You may find that within a few moments you have shared depths with this person that you have not shared with anyone else in your lifetime. This is not impulsivity, this is psychological recognition, but the ego often struggles to comprehend what the soul embraces easily. The ego craves certainty, labels, definitions. It asks questions. What is this connection? What does it mean? What will happen next? The soul does not ask these questions. It simply knows. It recognizes the other as a figure of significance, a carrier of symbolic meaning, a mirror of the self. The task is not to define the connection, but to experience it. The task is not to grasp it, but to surrender to its unfolding. You may wonder what distinguishes an awakened soul connection from ordinary attraction or emotional intensity. The answer is simple. In an awakened connection, the bond does not pull you outward into obsession or dependency. It pulls you inward. It awakens your inner world. It deepens your relationship with yourself. It expands your consciousness. It challenges your illusions. It dismantles your defense. It encourages your authenticity. In short, it makes you more yourself. Ordinary attraction begins with projection. Awakened connection begins with recognition. Ordinary relationships seek comfort. Awakened ones seek truth. Ordinary bonds fear conflict. Awakened bonds use conflict as fuel for transformation. This is why such connections cannot be forced or manufactured. They arise spontaneously as expressions of the psyche's readiness. You cannot summon an awakened counterpart before you have awakened yourself. And even if such a soul were to appear prematurely, you would not recognize them. You would perceive them through the lens of your projections and wounded patterns. Recognition requires clarity. It requires inner stillness. It requires the withdrawal of projections. It requires courage, the courage to see another soul without distortion. When two awakened souls meet, they often remind each other of forgotten dreams. They stir memories that the ego has buried. They activate archetypes that have long slept. You may feel compelled to revisit your childhood, to understand your lineage, to examine the patterns that shaped your psyche. You may feel drawn to creative expression, to spiritual exploration, to symbolic interpretation. This is not because the other person influences you, but because they awaken the deeper layers of your own psyche. In analytical psychology, we speak often of the anima and the animus, inner figures representing the soul's opposite qualities. When you meet an awakened counterpart, these archetypal figures are activated. The anima or animus becomes projected outward, not as illusion, but as revelation. Through the other, you encounter the part of yourself that has been waiting to emerge. This is why such connections often feel romantic, even when they are not about romance. The romance is internal, a union between your conscious and unconscious selves. One woman told me that meeting her awakened counterpart felt like remembering a language she had forgotten how to speak. The words flowed effortlessly, not from the mind but from the soul. The conversation felt like a dance of symbols. She said, it felt as though he understood the part of me that even I had not yet learned to understand. I told her, this was not because he possessed supernatural insight. It was because she was awakening to herself through him. He was the mirror. She was the reflection. It is one of the great mysteries of psychology that we often need another person in order to see ourselves clearly. And yet, let us acknowledge the paradox. Soul recognition is both humbling and empowering. You feel small in the presence of something larger than yourself, yet expanded by the realization that you are participating in a grander narrative. You feel exposed, yet safe. You feel challenged, yet supported. You feel disrupted, yet aligned. The psyche rarely grants such dualities, except in moments of profound transformation. When soul recognition occurs, something ancient within you stirs the archetype of the self rising like the sun behind the clouds. You sense your destiny unfolding not as a distant idea, but as a living presence. You feel guided, you feel summoned, and in the presence of the other soul, you begin to realize that your inner world is far vaster than you ever imagined. This is why such connections change everything, not because the other person enters your life, but because they awaken the parts of yourself you had forgotten were yours. And now, as we approach the innermost chamber of this phenomenon, we must understand that the meeting of two awakened souls is not simply an external event, it is an inner initiation. The psyche, in its infinite wisdom, does not bring such souls together for comfort or for pleasure. Though those may arise, it brings them together for evolution. The true purpose of this connection is transformation. And transformation is always a sacred disruption. When two awakened souls recognize each other, the unconscious begins to rearrange itself. Symbolic material that has long remained dormant suddenly becomes active. Old narratives fracture, new possibilities emerge. It is as though the meeting opens a portal through which the deeper layers of the psyche can finally speak, and what they say is often unsettling, for they reveal not who you have been, but who you are meant to become. I have witnessed in many individuals how such connections awaken an entirely new mode of being. One man described it as stepping into a version of myself that had been waiting behind a locked door. He told me that the meeting did not add anything to him. Rather, it removed the barriers that prevented him from seeing what was already there. This is the essence of awakening, not an accumulation of new qualities, but a revelation of the inherent essence that has been obscured by the ego's limitations. You must not mistake this for dependency. An awakened soul connection is not about clinging to the other, it is about being expanded by their presence. It is not about seeking refuge in their identity, it is about recognizing your own. If you attempt to hold on too tightly, the connection becomes distorted, for the soul does not respond to possession. The soul responds to freedom. It responds to truth. It responds to the unfiltered authenticity that arises when two individuals have walked so deeply into themselves that they no longer need to hide. This is why such connections are rare. Most relationships are built upon unconscious agreements. I will protect your illusion if you protect mine. But awakened souls cannot participate in such contracts. They have shattered their illusions, in the fires of their own suffering, they have confronted the shadow, not out of choice, but out of necessity. They have walked through inner hells in order to reclaim their own light. And so, when they meet, they do not meet as children seeking validation. They meet as keepers of their own truth. This truth is not always comfortable. In fact, the meeting may reveal wounds that you believed were healed. You may find that old insecurities resurface, not because the other has caused them, but because the psyche is presenting them for final integration. The connection acts as a spotlight, illuminating every unhealed fragment. It is not meant to shame you, it is meant to purify you. It is meant to prepare you for the next stage of your individuation. You may find yourself asking why the other person can trigger such depth in you, why their presence seems to activate memories, emotions, or dreams that no one else ever could. The answer lies in the nature of archetypal resonance. An awakened counterpart carries symbolic significance for your psyche. They personify qualities. You need to integrate courage, compassion, strength, intuition, discipline, vulnerability, creativity, authenticity. When you recognize these qualities in them, you are recognizing the dormant potential within yourself. This recognition can manifest in many ways. For some, it brings profound peace, a sense that life has finally aligned with its deeper purpose. For others, it brings restlessness, a sense that something long buried is rising to the surface. For others, still, it brings a deep longing, not for the person, but for the version of themselves that the person reflects. The longing is for your own wholeness. There is no single emotional tone that defines awakened connections. They can be gentle or fierce, calm or chaotic, soothing or destabilizing. What defines them is not emotion but depth. You cannot remain unchanged. The psyche does not allow it. Let me speak to something often misunderstood. Awakened soul connections do not guarantee permanent union. They do not promise lifelong companionship. They are not bound by the ego's expectations. Sometimes the connection endures, sometimes it does not. Sometimes the two souls walk together, sometimes they diverge. But whether they stay or go, the imprint remains, the transformation remains, the awakening remains. The ego wants permanence, but the soul wants evolution. The ego wants certainty, but the soul wants truth. The ego wants possession, but the soul wants expansion. And so, the soul does not measure the value of a connection by how long it lasts, but by how deeply it transforms you. A single moment of true recognition can have more impact than years of superficial partnership. A brief encounter with an awakened counterpart can do more for your psyche than decades of unconscious connection. If the soul's purpose in the meeting has been fulfilled, the form of the relationship may dissolve not as a failure, but as completion. If the soul's purpose remains, the connection endures in ways that defy logic. Distance or circumstance These connections do not end. They evolve. Even when separated physically, the bond continues to operate in the symbolic realm of the psyche. The other person becomes an inner figure, a guide, a mirror, a companion in dreams and reflections. Do not mistake this inner presence for fantasy. The psyche works with symbols, not with physical proximity. What matters is not whether the person is with you, but whether your soul is still learning from them. One patient dreamed repeatedly of a figure standing at the threshold of a temple. She told me the dream brought her great comfort. Though she did not know why, later she realized the figure represented a man she had once loved, a man whose presence awakened her to her own spiritual depth. Though they had long parted, his symbolic presence remained in her inner world, not as longing, but as guidance. The dream was not about him. It was about the part of her psyche he had awakened. This is the essence of awakened connections. They reveal inner archetypes. They awaken dormant aspects of the self. They guide you toward the hidden chambers of your psyche, where your destiny awaits. And now, let me address the highest dimension of this phenomenon, the union of two awakened souls as a symbol of the self. In analytical psychology, the self is the center and totality of the psyche. It is the organizing principle behind your thoughts, dreams, impulses, and desires. When two awakened souls recognize each other, it is often because the self is arranging the encounter as part of the individuation process. The other becomes the living symbol of your own wholeness. This is why you feel that uncanny sense of familiarity, that deep knowing, that strange inevitability. The self is speaking, the self is guiding, the self is revealing. The soul connection becomes a mirror in which the self reflects itself. This is why the meeting feels sacred. It is not the other soul you are overwhelmed by, it is the image of your own emerging wholeness. This is why no awakened connection is accidental. The self does not play with chance. In these moments, the veil thins. You sense that your life is not a series of random events, but a coherent narrative shaped by the unconscious. You sense that your suffering has served a purpose. You sense that the universe is not indifferent but intelligent, and the awakened counterpart becomes the one who stands beside you in this revelation, whether briefly or for a lifetime. So, what must you do when such a connection enters your life? First, do not resist it. Resistance creates suffering. Second, do not cling to it. Clinging distorts its purpose. Third, do not rush it. The psyche unfolds in its own time. Fourth, do not reduce it to labels. Labels shrink what is meant to expand you. Allow the connection to move as it must, through stillness, through intensity, through silence, through revelation. Let it teach you, let it challenge you, let it unravel you, let it rebuild you, and above all, let it awaken you to yourself. For when two awakened souls finally recognize each other, the connection does not merely change your life, it reveals the truth that your life was always leading you to this moment. And from that moment on, nothing inside you can remain asleep.